Welcome to the Why Not You podcast, where our goal is to inspire, teach, and elevate your personal journey. Our heart-centered guests love sharing some of their life-changing aha moments, hoping that it might be of benefit to you. Welcome to our podcast. Today we are privileged to have Laura Pattillo as our guest, and I know she has some very interesting things to share with us today. Laura, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Let me give you a 30,000-foot view of Laura Pattillo. She's married, has 5 children, and I just learned today that she's an opera singer. And she also homeschools her 5 children, plus being an author of more than 65 books, and she has sold over 250,000 books. That is amazing. Laura, that is a remarkable resume, and I know I haven't even scratched the surface. Before we get too deep, I'd like to have you tell a little bit about where you grew up, what it was like in your household, those kinds of things.
Okay, well, I grew up actually in a tiny little place called Pasco, Washington. Out in the very north end of it, my family were farmers. So I grew up on about 5 acres and the family farm was out further, but I had chickens and sheep and pigs and horses and cows and changed handpipe and did all that wonderful stuff. And grew up driving tractor from the time I was like 7, knew how to get dirty and loved it. You know, it was a good growing up, lots of that kind of thing.
Well, we share that in common. I grew up on a farm as well in Southeast Idaho and did all those same types of things. So anyway, that's awesome to know. That even elevates you a whole lot more in my eyes.
It teaches you how to work, that's for sure. That kind of lifestyle.
Well, Laura, I've written 4 books. I've published 1 and I've co-authored 1. I have 2 that I don't dare publish. And for you to have written and published over 65 books, that is amazing. And
Thank you.
And I just want to know, how did you get started and how did you overcome, or maybe you didn't have any fears or whatever, but how did you get started in writing?
So it's a little bit of a long story. We mentioned that I sing. And that's actually what I headed to college for. I started as an opera major. I was really into music. And when I started singing, my life just kind of blew up. I had always loved English and writing as a little girl, but once music hit my life, it just like, that was the end all. And especially coming from my tiny little town, it was like, oh my gosh, you know, like everyone grabbed the little girl who could sing. So that took over and I headed down to college down in Utah at BYU and was in their vocal performance program. And I was there for 3 years until I got sick. I got sick with pneumonia and had a really rough semester and ended up coming home to try to get better. So I came home in January and wasn't planning to go back till September and ended up getting married. And that was the end of my time at BYU there. But I had like 78 credits or something because I'd been there so long. And I was like, it is really ridiculous for me to not finish a degree with this many credits under my belt. So I couldn't finish music. There was nowhere close by here in the Tri-Cities for me to do that. So I ended up swapping my major and going into English because I could finish everything I needed online. I had so many other credits. All my generals were done. So I ended up with a degree in English with an emphasis in creative writing, which was what I had enjoyed as a kid. And right after I got married, I spent about a decade doing professional singing work, pretty much full time, and having all of my children.
Now, wait a minute, Laura. You had 5 children in a 10-year period of time?
I had 5 children in 7 years.
Oh, okay. Well, do explain.
Well, I have a set of twins, but we had a oops, you're pregnant and oops, it's 2 moment. So I had a boy and then 2 years later I had a girl. And then 18 months later came the twins. So I had 3 girls within 18 months of each other. And then we got brave and had 1 more a couple of years after that. So yeah, I've like, it literally.
Well, you got your Fab 5.
I have my basketball team. We're good to go.
Right. Good deal.
They're a fun bunch. And 4 of them are teenagers now. My oldest graduates this coming summer. So we're just about to start entering that work towards the empty nest phase.
Okay. Well, thanks for explaining that a little bit. Now I'll let you go on.
Anyway, so I sang those first 10 years of our marriage. But as I wanted to settle down a little more with the kids and singing became a little bit more of a side gig, I said to my husband, hey, you know, I've got this degree now. I think I'd like to write a book. And he's like, okay. So I actually started in children's literature and tried going the traditional route and had an experience with a publishing house that kind of put me off of that. for a while. And I walked away and was like, never again. I'm not dealing with that again. And then a couple years later was like, no, I want to try this again. And came back and went into romance and just started. I got into the indie publishing scene at that point because I didn't want to mess with the publishing houses anymore. And
indie, what does that mean? Independent?
Yes. So I was going to publish this one myself.
Okay.
Right. So I found a bunch of groups on Facebook, and it was at the time when the indie scene had kind of blown up at the time, and there was a huge amount of them, and there was a whole bunch of resources, which the first time around, there wasn't as many resources, but that couple of year span made a huge difference. And so I found some groups that had so much information and told me exactly what I needed to do to get going. And so I wrote my first book, and it took me 7 months to write my first book, and it was only 35,000 words. And I ended up writing a 10-book series. They were all contemporary fairy tale retellings set in a school. It was a private school. And so the teachers, were falling in love with people, and they were all different characters within fairy tales kind of things. So there's some books that, I learned how to write during that series, but I don't always recommend those books to people if they want to read what I write now, because I've got letters since those first ones. But they did okay, and they surprised me, actually, my first one out. And I still remember when I saw like 2 sales on my dashboard, and I was like, I'm like an author, like people are buying my book. And that was super exciting. And as it actually started to get a few reviews in, I was like, okay, let's try this again. And so we wrote book 2, and then we wrote book 3. And they just got faster. And I was writing it around the kids and during nap times and little bits and spaces here. So book 2 took me about 3 months. And then by the time I got to about book 5, I was writing them in about a 4-week span. I was putting out these little 35,000 word books at about every 4 weeks. And it would take me 4 weeks to write it. And then it would take about another 4 weeks to edit and format and then get it out. So after that series of first books that were all in the 35,000 word range, I decided to bump up my word count and jumped up to about 55,000 words and started in a new series. And the next sets of series were all about the same, but they were different genres. There was billionaires and bodyguards and cowboys, until I finally settled a couple years ago on Sweet Small Town Romance. And they're set on the Oregon coast. That I bumped up again to 75,000 words, wanting to get a little deeper in depth with my characters. And that book is called Her Unexpected Roommate. It blew up. And that's when I knew that I'd really found my niche in the romance genre. And that's where I've been ever since. I finished that series and have moved on to another series, but there's continuing with the Sweet Small Town. They're all set on the Oregon coast, and they're all friends to family, people in their late 20s and early 30s finding love and the things they have to overcome to get there. And last August, the first 3 books in that first Small Town series hit the USA Today as a box set, the USA Today bestsellers list. And so that was very exciting. And I really enjoyed that little bump. But yeah, that's what I continue to do now. And those are 75,000 words. So a little bit longer.
Well, thank you, Laura. That's amazing. And congratulations on that. I mean, I get excited when I get one sale. So hey, I'm just curious if you ever really had imposter syndrome or didn't feel like you belong or had to overcome some kind of a challenge or fear that you wouldn't be accepted or recognized, anything like that?
A little bit. I know people who have had it super hard, like enough that it paralyzes them. And I've never struggled with it quite that hard. But especially by about book 3, it was like you start getting the first little feedback and you get all excited. And then it's like, but what if they don't like the next one? What if I write one they don't like this time? I wasn't confident enough in my writing skills at that point, even though I had a little bit of early success. And I was very afraid of letting down the people who were starting to read my books. But the more I wrote, the more I was like, you know what? If they like what I'm writing, they're going to stick around. And if they don't, then they aren't my right audience. And that's kind of what I've just stuck with is the people who are here want to be here. I don't force anyone to read my books, right? If they want my book, they'll get it. And if they don't, then they'll go find what they do want. There's so many books out there that everyone can find what they want. And it's hard when you get, reviews that aren't always as nice. And because I write in sweet, sometimes I get some not very nice reviews from people who wish there was other things in my books that aren't there. But it just is what it is. And I've learned to kind of just let those things go. The more I write, the less I worry about that. And the more confident I become that I'm telling a story that I think is worth telling. And those who want to read it will read it. And then if it flops, then I'll learn from that. And I've had a few of those flops. Like that first Sweet Small Town series is 10 books long. And book number 7 actually did not do very well. And I discovered as I went through, and these are things we all learn, in any career that you choose, it was about a hidden celebrity in that small town. And I got feedback from my readers, some of my readers who had been there for a long time. And they were like, we'd rather have the plumber than the celebrity. They like the down to earth type of guy. And so I've never put another celebrity in my books. That wasn't the kind of, character they wanted, that real Hallmark type of feel. And that small town was not the feel they wanted to bring someone, from the limelight in as their character. So we learn as we go. And I took that information and said, okay, and ran with it. And I haven't done it again. So.
Well, that's tremendous, because I think there's a lot of people that do have imposter syndrome when they get started and they don't feel like they belong, or who am I, and that type of thing. And I just wondered if you had any of that, but it sounds like you've had a little bit of it and you've had to kind of overcome and find out, just the skill to do comes from doing, right?
Right.
And that's what you've really kind of settled in there. But how many books was that before you really settled in?
It probably was a good 10 to 12 before I was like, no,
right.
We're okay. We're okay. We're going to be all right.
Well, good. That's awesome. So you homeschool your 5 children. Is that primarily your responsibility, or is that your husband sharing that responsibility, or?
All me.
It's all you. All right. So when in the world do you find time to write?
Well, I've learned to write very fast because I started when they were little and I only had snippets of time. I've learned to just really be fast. And the more I've done it, the more I've created systems. I know exactly what I'm writing and when I'm going to have that time for it. But my kids being older now is actually a little easier to get the word count in. And I've dedicated times that I say, okay, this is mom's writing time. I get this hour. And they go off and they get lunch or, whatever it is they're going to do. And I get my hour to write. And I can usually get out about 2,500 words in that hour, which is enough to just keep me moving in a book. And I've written enough at this point that when I finish a book, there are less edits on it than there used to be. So I will do an edit of my book, and then it will go through my beta reader, and I will take their edits into consideration. And some I change and some I don't. And then it goes to my grammar editor that I hire out. And then I take their edits and put those in, and then I publish the book. So I know people who go through 20 of their own edits before they will put a book out. And I don't give it that kind of time. I usually know what I want to put down. And so it's very rare for me to have to do more than one edit of my own before I start passing it on to other people. But that's come with just, millions of words being written. And I know what my readers want and I know what I want to say. And so I've got it fairly streamlined at this point.
Now, do you allocate a little bit of time every day, or do you go to the Oregon coast and sit there and lock yourself up for 10 days, bang out a book? I mean, how does that work?
I would love to go do that. No, it's every day. It's every day. And I have a super supportive husband. He works a 9 to 5, so he's gone during the day when I'm dealing with my own work and the kids. But there are evenings when he comes home and I'm like, I didn't get to any of my stuff today. And they take care of dinner and I go lock myself in the room and just, pound out what I need to pound out. So he's super good about that. And I use modern technology. I employ things like grocery delivery service so that I don't have to waste time going to the grocery store. And I've got a kid who's 18, so he can run errands for me if need be. My husband often has Fridays off. So I will just start making a list of things I need him to do on Fridays so that I can just work during the week, because between homeschooling and what I do, it's 2 full-time jobs. And he's super good about that. So the household we've just figured out how to make it work. But I've also learned how to make it as efficient as possible, because I want time with my kids that isn't homeschooling. We want to play games in the evenings and we want to still go on vacations and things like that. So we all try to be very efficient during the day so that those things can all be done.
Well, I think the key there is, from what I've learned from other authors and whatnot, is the discipline of daily writing.
Right.
And that's where I suffer from that. I just don't learning. I'm trying very hard to set aside a certain time every day to write, to blog. For me, writing to me gives me clarity. And I don't necessarily write for other people. I write for me.
Right.
To give me clarity. And so I'm learning that discipline to write at the same time every day in the same place so that I can connect with that energy, connect with that routine, if you will.
Right.
And learn the discipline.
It helps. It definitely helps, I think. Our brains are amazing. They will start to click into place. Any habit that we, will work to form in them, it'll click its way into place eventually. Sometimes it takes a little longer than we want, but it'll get there.
Yeah. So, you said it was how many months for your first book?
7.
Well, my first book was 13 or 14 years. So
I've had people say that to me in the author community. Yeah, sometimes it just takes longer. That's okay. But you got it done. And I got it done. The amount of people that actually finish their book is super small. So that's amazing. Well done.
Well, thank you. Laura, I've worked from home for the last 25 years, and I know how difficult that is. All the distractions, the interruptions, the ease of not working and doing something more enjoyable than work. So you've kind of explained that a little bit. Where did you learn the discipline? Where did that come from? Was that the farm?
Yeah, I had to have started, I think, on the farm, but I've always kind of just been an active doer. I was one of those teenagers that was gone like 16 hours a day because I was in 0 hour and I was doing after school sports. And then I had other stuff in the evenings. And I was always doing. And so when I, moved on to college and stuff, I was doing the same thing. I was doing opera practice and I was in the choirs and I was, doing my own stuff. And I've never not been a doer, I suppose. But I also don't just enjoy doing, I enjoy doing well. And so there's a natural desire to progress and practice and do things. I still remember my sister, I roomed with her for a little bit at college. And she said, she minored in dance, folk dance. And she said, if I would give half the effort to folk dance that you give to your singing, I could have majored in it. But she didn't want to give that much effort, which is fine. She actually had a wonderful career, but that's a natural thing for me to want to push forward. It probably got harder after I had kids because at this point, when I was younger, life was about me anyways, so the doing was always about me. It didn't matter. I wasn't responsible for anybody else. But after having children, when I had responsibilities in other places, that's actually when I had to start saying, oh, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to, there's other things now that come first. Time with my kids comes first. Their homeschooling comes first. I've learned over the years I'm a morning person, and that's probably totally from the farm. And I get up at 5 a.m. every morning to exercise because I feel better if I exercise and I don't want to take away time from my kids during the day. So I get up early and I exercise and get those things done before the kids even get out of bed so that I can make sure I have that time. And then we do the homeschooling in the morning. And then I take the lunch hour to do that's my uninterrupted writing hour block from 12 to 1 o'clock. And the kids aren't working during that time anyway. So I'm not taking time away from them. They get a break from the teacher, which they want anyways. And they're getting lunch or whatever they're doing. And that is my writing time. But if I don't do it, then I always regret it. And so on the days when I don't want it to be there, I don't want to sit out and pound out the words, or when I'm in the part of the story that is no fun, that nobody wants to read, right when they're breaking up in the story or things aren't going well, I remind myself that if you don't do this, you will regret it later. And sometimes I have to drop it down because there are just days that are hard, right? We're human. And it is just sometimes hard. And so there are times where I will break it down and I will say 10 minutes. You can do anything for 10 minutes. And most of us, right, and if it's even worse than that, you could break it down to 5. But most of the time, if you will get started, it will keep going. And so I get that 10 minutes done and it's like, oh, but now I know what I want them to say. Now I know what I want to come next. And so it just keeps continuing to flow at that point. But so I've learned little mind tricks with myself over the years to just just get in that chair. And I've also learned what it's like to be up against a deadline and where you're just panicked about getting that pre-order out. And I do not like that at all. And so that emotion is enough to make me earlier.
Pace yourself. Yeah.
Yes, to keep
Yeah,
going
pace
at the
yourself.
earlier
Yep.
time, because I don't like being panicked. It is not something I handle very well.
So how do you get in character? The small town romantic, how do you get in character? Do you read books? Do you watch Netflix? Do you just imagine these things and put it in your own mind? How do you do that?
So I'm not a big movie watcher. I used to be a really big romance reader, and I'm not as much as I used to be. Writing as much as I do, I actually enjoy reading it less. But I do read a few sometimes because you just got to keep, I want to see what's popular right now and what people are, what's hitting the top of the charts and some of those things. But my brain seems to be a constant stream of like romance movies that my own brain, I really don't know how else to describe that. Like I did not realize it was not normal to carry on conversations with strangers in your head until I started writing. My husband's like, yeah, I don't think most people do that. But I would imagine scenarios in the shower and stuff that had nothing to do with anything and just scenes, and I'd see things. And I just thought everyone kind of did that kind of thing, that we all had imaginations that did that. And he's like, no, I don't talk to myself that way. And I'm like, okay, good to know. So I tend to break my things down. Some of my favorite things to watch are actually Disney movies. I love Pixar. I love fairy tales. And I loved watching those with my kids. In fact, I'm still a huge fan of Zootopia. I don't know if you know which Disney that is, but when I'm having a bad day, my kids are always like, pull out Zootopia, mom needs a laugh, because that's like my go-to lighthearted, break the tension movie. And I imagine a lot of times as I go through planning out my series that I put, even though I'm not writing fairy tale remakes anymore, I give kind of stereotypical Disney princess characters to some of my women. And so I've got the one that's maybe super studious, like Belle. She's, not necessarily very interested in dating. She's got a career. She's, wanting to make a name for herself. And then you've got the one like Cinderella, who maybe came from a hard background and she needs to learn what it's like to let people back in, a little deeper than a Disney princess. But I'm taking some of those stereotypical things and then I work in my heroes and my princes. And so there's a fairy tale-esque feeling to the love story, even though I'm throwing them into these modern heartbreaking situations, single parents and dads dying and watching that. My current series has a father that's ill from my very first character in book 1. And we watch the progression of his illness through all of the books, but these are hard real life things, but we're watching the happiness in each book from these people finding love at the same time. So I am driven by that. I love lighthearted stories and ways to make people smile. And so it's just a constant churning. And I'd say probably Disney princesses are probably my biggest form of inspiration for that, because I don't know, that's just what's always stuck with me. And that's who I base a lot of my characters off of, but in modern times. So.
Well, Laura, I believe that we live in kind of an Instagram world where everything is depicted as perfect and normal for everybody but me. Everyone's got it going on. Everyone's having success and they're going places, doing things, and their kids are perfect and what have you. I know that's not true. That's not true.
Right.
And I want to ask you, what are the challenges, obstacles, the messy middle, I call it, the messy middle that you have had to overcome and work through, and how did you do it?
So that's a hard question. Not because I don't know the answer, but because sometimes these are hard to share, right? One of the biggest things I've struggled with, I have a special needs child and he's high functioning. He's going to live a life just fine, but he's got several learning disabilities. He's the reason I homeschool. One of those kids who's super brilliant outside the box, but you put him in a classroom and he completely fails. And I've learned how to work with him, how to teach him in the way that he actually understands and works with. I've had a child with an addiction that I've had to work through. That was a lot of hard years. There was a lot of years of struggle in the beginning of my writing with self-worth As a singer, I was super, super visible. This is not something I like to necessarily tell a lot of people. But here,
Well,
I'll let your people.
you don't have to if you don't want to. I mean,
it's the ugly part, which is what you're getting, the raw part.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, and we all have something. We all go through something or multiple things. And that's what I don't think Instagram teaches.
Exactly.
And I think this is really good for people to understand. It hurts.
It does. Shifting into being a full-time stay-at-home mom and being a writer actually was a really hard transition for me. As a singer, I was super visible and I was a soloist. I wasn't someone just in the choir. And so I would go places and have people stop me and say, I saw you sing at this, and when you're home with 4 toddlers and you're changing diapers on 3 of them all day long, that's not a visible thing, right? And it's really easy to get lost in that. And it's really easy to feel like nobody notices what I do, but I'm working harder at being a mom than I ever worked at being an opera singer. And transitioning into authorship and being a writer gave me an outlet, but it's not necessarily something that's super visible either, which is fine. I've gotten past that, but there was a lot of years where it was a real struggle in saying, well, I write. People would ask what I do. I say, I write. I'm an author. And I'd get one of 2 responses. I would get the response of, oh, so it's like you have a hobby. Well, no, like I write full time, like I write books. I started finally telling people I run my own publishing house because that finally oh, like you have a business. Yes, I do. I have a business. I actually do something and I actually produce a product. But I also got people like this last summer, I finally kind of opened some eyes at my church. I have had a 12-passenger van for a long time. Not a fancy vehicle to drive, but great for carpool. And they had asked me to drive several times to different youth activities, but these were like across state lines. And I said, I can't drive as many times as you're asking me to because I have too many deadlines with work. But I can drive twice. I can drive there or I can drive back, one of the two, because I'm happy to let people use my van. And I actually got a whole bunch of people who kind of got upset at me a little bit because they're like, well, isn't it like you write for like 15 minutes in the evenings and that's like all you do, right? No, that's not all I do. So that feeling just not being seen, I think, is a very difficult one. And it makes us feel like we have less worth. And that was something I had to learn to overcome to where I could say no, because it was more important for me to take care of what I needed at home than to necessarily be the one to drive in that carpool. And I wouldn't have been strong enough to say that before. It would have mattered more to me what they thought years before. And I've learned that no, what I do is worthwhile. What I do is worth fighting for, even if people don't see it, even if they don't understand it. I do good things. Homeschooling my kids is a good thing, but there's still people who look at that and think that it's ridiculous. And why don't I just send them back? Having a child with learning disabilities, unless you have one like that, it's a hard one to understand. He's a great kid, but he's a difficult kid to work with. And so there's ugly parts of all of our lives. But I think through those, if you are set on conquering, you will eventually conquer. It's sometimes a slow process, but I can tell you that through it all, I think the biggest thing I've learned is how to love. And that probably sounds cheesy, but loving a child that is not going to meet the expectations you had for them when they arrived is a different kind of love. And loving people who don't understand what you do or maybe belittle what you do is a different step in love. And loving yourself for doing things that other people don't appreciate is a different step in love. And those are all things that I have learned to have. And it took years. I'm not saying this was an easy process, but it took years to be able to just find that contentment that, no, we can love others. We can love, people who are going to change things, and we can love ourselves as we go through this, despite the fact that I don't have an Instagram life at all.
Well, and I think the hardest of all those things that you talked about, at least it is for me, is to love yourself, to give yourself some grace, some mercy.
Right.
And for what you have done, what you are challenging yourself with and learning and growing, it's hard. It's real hard. It's a lot easier for me to love someone else than it is to love myself.
That's true. It's a comparison thing. We compare, I have friends who have written as many books as I have, but have made twice as much money. So it's easy to say what I've done isn't as good, But no, I don't want it to be not as good. I want to choose that it is just as good, and
I want to just do the very best I can and not have any expectations. Just do the best I can and let the work show for itself.
Exactly.
and learn and grow and be better, So, Laura, this has been awesome. I know you've been very vulnerable and shared a lot of nuggets of wisdom and, again, that vulnerability. And I know that's not easy. So thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing. I think you will resonate with so many people. Oh. And that is our goal here, is to be real, to be genuine, to be authentic, and to, just buoy each other up and, put up a good fight. That's really what we're all about. So thank you for sharing that.
That's wonderful. That's what we should all be doing, is helping build each other up. So thank you so much for letting me be here.
One last question before we go, and I think you've already, touched on it, but if you had one nugget of wisdom, one thing that you could share with our listeners to better themselves or whatever, what is the one thing that you would share with them to be your pearl of wisdom, I should say?
If I was going to break it down to one thing, I would probably say to never let time be your excuse. We have so many things we want to accomplish in this life, and it's so common for us to say, I just don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. If we want it to happen and we want to make it a priority, we will find the time for it, whether that's to write a book, whether it's to learn how to sing, learn to play the guitar, whether it's to go talk to the neighbor next door or go out to lunch with your friends, whatever it is, you can find the time. All of us can find the time. And those moments are the ones that propel us to find the time again, and then find the time again, and then find the time again. And as we continue to do that for ourselves, or whether it's in a capacity to serve others or whatever it is, that radiates within us. When we serve others, people can see that we have that contentment. When we are bettering ourselves, then we can help better the people around us. We're more capable. So never let time be an excuse to stop you from doing something.
I heard it this way, and it's very good. Thank you very much. I heard it this way. Life is like a suitcase. And some people just seem to pack more in a suitcase. We all have the same amount of hours in the day, and some people just have a way of packing a little bit more in.
Right.
And it all comes down to priorities. So thank you for that. Well, Laura, thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to talk to you today. And I'll put in the show notes where folks can find you. I know you write under a couple of different author names or whatever. Is there two or one?
There's two. I use pen names because if you look up Laura Pattillo, you find my singing career. And I didn't want those to all get mixed up. So they're not secrets, but I do have two pen names. I write in two different genres. Romance is just my biggest one. So. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure and an honor to talk to you today and share your pearls of wisdom, and continued success to you and your writing and your family. Thank you. It has just been an honor to be here. Thank you for asking me to come. So Laura, as a writer, you get reviews and what have you. How do you handle the feedback that comes back through the different mediums that you publish through or work through? So I've gotten better at it over the years. When I very first started putting out books, I read every review that came through, and I shed a tear or two over a few of them. But as I have become confident in who I am as a writer, as I've realized who I am and where I'm happiest and the stories I want to tell, I still read a lot of my reviews, especially the beginning ones that come through on a book. But I do it mostly because I've gotten to the point where I want to say, okay, was there something that is repeatedly coming up that they don't like? And if so, what is it and why did they not like it? What was it about the story that didn't ring well for them or wasn't the happy note that they were looking for in my stories? And I use that to propel myself forward now. I don't tend to read the 1-star reviews if those come through, because a lot of times those are just not the right readers when they come through. And so people who are willing to write a 1-star review, they're not happy with the whole book. And that's not the kind of feedback I want. A lot of times the 3-star is about right, where they're like, well, the most of the book was fine, but this kind of irked me. And if I get something repeatedly through those, then I take that and I can move on and say, okay, they didn't like this. The basis of the story was fine, but this character irked them a little bit. So maybe I won't do that type of personality next time. Or maybe they just were too over the top and I want to tone them down. Or I mentioned before that they didn't like having a celebrity in the book. That wasn't the type of career they wanted their men to have, right? They wanted more down to earth type of men in the books I write. So it's become for me a way to learn how to better myself as opposed to something that actually pulls me back. But it took a while to get there. And it takes a while to separate yourself from it and to remember that, okay, it's okay for them to not like it because I can do this again and then I can do better instead of getting stuck and settling and saying, they didn't like this, now I'm just never going to write again. That's not where you want to be. Anything that is a feedback should be able to propel you forward. And if it doesn't, then your reaction to it is wrong, or the feedback is just the kind that isn't meant to help you get better. It's the kind that someone is just trying to be cruel, and that's not helpful. So you have to learn to separate the two and then learn how to react in the way to propel forward.
Thank you so much for that, Laura. That's so true. Critique is important for moving forward.
Right.
I did a podcast with Kevin Eastman a few episodes ago, and he was an NBA coach. And Kevin Garnett was one of the greatest of all times. And Kevin Garnett welcomed critique, because if he got a shot blocked or whatever by the same person over and over again, he wanted to know about it.
Right.
So I think it really fits in exactly with what you're talking about here, is just criticism can be helpful and we can learn from it. Thank you for that, Laura.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank our guests for sharing a part of their experience with us on this episode of Why Not You? Also, we'd like to thank Mix It 6 Studios for producing, editing, mixing, and creating our great music for this podcast. But most importantly, we'd like to thank you for listening. Be sure to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode of Why Not You? See you next time.